day after the primary election, and we have a ton of results to get to. We'll start with one of the most talked about primary races in years for the state of Nebraska, the Republican race for governor. The Associated Press has called it for Jim Pillen, who received over 33% of the vote. Followed closely behind is Charles Herbster, who got just over 30%, and Brett Lindstrom, who received nearly 26%. Teresa Thibodeau was also considered a top contender for the GOP nomination. She received just over 6% of the vote.
Pillen will face Democrat and State Senator Carol Blood in the race for governor this November. Blood easily defeating fellow Democrat Roy Harris in the primary race. Blood and Pillen will be joined by Libertarian Scott Zimmerman on the general election ballot.
The candidate endorsed by the governor defeats the candidate endorsed by the former president, as Jim Pillen tops Charles Herbster to win the Republican nomination.
NTV's Steve White spoke to Pillen in Lincoln.
Governor Pete Ricketts said it came down to the 3rd district. Voters in central and western Nebraska. Jim Pillen himself says it was those in agriculture made this win reality.
There is no place like Nebraska. We live in the greatest place in the world, and it's all because of the people in Nebraska. There's no way I can't be out and about and thank everybody for everything they've done. I'm incredibly humbled how all of the people that are on Team Pillen, how much they've done.
We've had governors who have an ag background, maybe grew up on the farm, but to have somebody who's involved day to day in agriculture, what do you think is different about that and makes you unique in that way?
Well, there's a couple things. I'll be the first governor in Nebraska that I get through in the fall in 100 years from agriculture. I think there's some things that are really, really important. Number one, people don't know it, but we are the best in the world in agriculture.
Finally, tonight's not the end, it's a beginning. You now move on to a general election. Thoughts on facing Carol Blood and drawing some distinctions for the voters between the two of you?
We're going to continue to run our campaign like we have, grassroots, keep growing Team Pillen, make sure that we get all conservative Republicans on our team, and I think that's a really important piece to carry us to this.
Charles Herbster calls it a nasty campaign. Jim Pillen says now's the time for Republicans to unite, while Democrat Carol Blood says she's focused on kitchen table issues. Now Blood and Pillen will face off on the November ballots. Reporting in Lincoln, I'm Steve White.
Thank you. Meanwhile, Pillen's challenger in the general election, Democrat Carol Blood, releasing the statement saying in part, quote, "My campaign has a plan, and we started sharing our plan as soon as we came out of the gate. We didn't tweak our message or hope Nebraskans would forget some of the things said at the beginning of the campaign. We stood strong in intent to craft a better Nebraska for all, no matter who they are, where they live, what they look like, or where they come from."
Meanwhile, an endorsement from former President Donald Trump wasn't enough to carry Charles Herbster to a victory in last night's gubernatorial primary.
NTV's Alex Whitney was at Herbster's watch party and brings us the latest from Lincoln.
It was a tough night at the polls for Charles Herbster, who never led in his gubernatorial primary. And while he did make a late surge, it wasn't enough to overcome the eventual nominee, Jim Pillen.
You need to know that we got about 65,000 votes. That wasn't enough, but that was a significant amount of votes, far more than even what Governor Ricketts received in 2014 when he ran the first race.
Before the polls closed, it was predicted to be a tight three-way race between Herbster and the other two Republican favorites, Jim Pillen and Brett Lindstrom. But as the votes started to roll in, Herbster, who has been endorsed by former President Donald Trump, found himself in 3rd place behind the other two, trailing by thousands of votes. It was a tough start for Herbster, who for weeks has battled accusations that he sexually assaulted multiple women at campaign events over the last few years.
This is probably one of the nastiest governor campaigns in the state of Nebraska. Is that true? Yes. Okay.
Despite the disappointing loss, Herbster said he was happy with his campaign and said he had no regrets about running for governor.
I said I would rather take the shot at running for governor and not succeed than to not have taken the shot and think always, what if I would have tried?
So while it was a tough night for Charles Herbster, he says he isn't ruling out a career in politics, telling the crowd here that he didn't say he wouldn't run again. Reporting here from Lincoln, I'm Alex Whitney.
Alex, thank you. Now to Congress and the race for the District 3 seat, which encompasses much of Nebraska outside of the Omaha and Lincoln areas. On the Republican side, Adrian Smith, who is now Nebraska's senior member of the House, unofficially getting 76% of the vote to easily get the primary win over challenger Mike Calhoun. Smith won his first term in Congress in 2006, replacing Tom Osborne.
On the Democratic side, David Else and Daniel Wick faced off to see who could win their party's nomination and advance to November. Unofficial results show David Else received 52% of the vote, while Daniel Wick had 48%. The winner here will join Smith and Legal Marijuana Now party candidate Mark Elworth Jr. on the general election ballot. Now to the first district race out of the Lincoln area. This race got itself extra attention once now former Congressman Jeff Fortenberry resigned the seat after being convicted of lying to the FBI in a case involving $30,000 from a foreign donor. State Senator Mike Flood easily getting past his GOP challengers with 73% of the vote. Because Fortenberry resigned after the deadline to be on the ballot, his name remained for the primary election. He received the second most votes, getting 12%. And a reminder, this race is for the next term of Congress, which begins next year. Mike Flood will be the Republican nominee on the June 28th special election to fill out the remainder of Fortenberry's current term.
On the other side of the aisle, fellow state Senator Patty Pansing Brooks gets the Democratic nomination. First district voters will see Pansing Brooks' name again June 28th when she faces off against Flood to fill Fortenberry's seat for the remainder of 2022. And based on the results, they'll face off again in November to fill the next term in Congress for District 1. Now to the Secretary of State race, which acts almost as de facto general election races, as the only names on the ballot are Republicans and only one can move on to November. This race featured the incumbent, Bob Evnen, attempting to defend his seat against two men who claimed election fraud here in Nebraska. Evnen, as well as other election officials across the state, denied those claims. It looks like Evnen will keep his job as he got 44% of the vote, beating out Robert Bohr and Rex Schroeder.
Now to the race to replace Attorney General Doug Peterson. Republican and Speaker of the Legislature Mike Hilgers taking on Jennifer Hicks for their party's nomination. Hilgers getting the majority of the votes with 67%. With no Democrats running in the race, Hilgers advances to face Legal Marijuana Now party member Larry Bollinger.
Let's head to Grand Island and a three-person race for the city's mayor. Current Mayor Roger Steele facing challengers Doug Brown and Julie Wright. The top two finishers in this race face each other again in November's general election, so it'll be Mayor Steele against Brown.
And TV's Lauren Bentley spoke with the two about their thoughts moving forward into the general election.
Trinity Lutheran Church is just one of the many places people have come to vote on who they want to be the next mayor of Grand Island. With early voting revealing Mayor Roger Steele a shoo-in for the general election, the race came close between Doug Brown and Julie Wright, with Brown taking the second spot in the race. Steele and Brown say from now until November, they'll be campaigning throughout the city.
Well, it's mainly to get out with the people and talk to them and make sure they know where I stand and what I can do for the city of Grand Island.
And the beautiful thing about campaigning for office is you get a lot of feedback from people. So that informs you as to what's important to them, and then you can incorporate that into your campaign.
And they say they'll campaign fairly.
The thing I like about this campaign, it's been a very positive campaign.
No negative campaign at all whatsoever in the mayor's race.
But both think you should vote for them based on their experience.
My leadership, I've been in 30 years management and leadership, senior, and I've directed 400 or 500 people at one time and $1 million projects. I have the experience.
I think I've done a good job as mayor for 4 years, and I was also on the city council, so I bring a lot of experience to this position. And I just hope the people of Grand Island look at my record and look at my work, and they confirm it for a vote for me.
Reporting in Grand Island, I'm Lauren Bentley.